Thank you for listening to 10,000 Stories to Sleep 2, your one-stop channel for a variety of short stories. If you feel up to it, subscribe to the channel for daily uploads so you never miss a new story. Enjoy. The Man Who Lives on the Hill collection, starting with Volume 1. In the small, fog-draped town of Eldridge, there lived an old man, Henry Kroll. His house, perched atop a lonely hill, was a tangle of gnarled wood and creeping ivy. The townsfolk spoke of it in hushed tones, not out of fear, but out of an ingrained unease. Henry was a reclusive figure, his face a map of deep lines and shadows. His eyes, though dimmed by age, seemed to hold a glint of something ancient and unsettling. Rumours floated around Eldridge, whispering of his peculiar habits. It was said that Henry never ventured out during the day, and that he spoke only to the shadows cast by his candlelight. One stormy night, young Lucy Caldwell, an adventurous soul with a curiosity as boundless as the storm itself, dared to approach Henry's house. Her friends had dared her, and the idea of proving them wrong spurred her forward, despite the chill that seemed to seep through the very air. Henry's gaze grew distant. "Loneliness is a comfort in my age," he replied. "Besides, I have company enough." Lucy frowned. "Company? I don't see anyone." Henry's eyes shifted, a flicker of something unsettling passing through them. "Not everyone is visible to the eyes of the young," he murmured. As the night deepened, the storm outside intensified. The wind's howl grew louder, and the shadows on the walls began to shift, coiling and twisting as if they were alive. Lucy felt a chill creep up her spine, but she dismissed it as nerves. Suddenly, the shadows seemed to converge on one spot, and Lucy's heart skipped a beat. She saw a figure forming in the darkness. It was a man, or at least the semblance of one, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. "Henry, what is that?" Lucy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry's expression remained impassive. "My companions," he said softly, "are the ones who keep me company in the dark." The figure in the shadows moved closer, and Lucy could see its eyes fixated on her, empty and soulless. Panic surged through her as she tried to stand, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. The figure reached out with a skeletal hand, its touch cold and clammy. As it drew nearer, the room seemed to contract, the walls closing in around Lucy. She could hear a soft, sinister whispering, as if the shadows themselves were murmuring secrets in a language she could not understand. Henry's voice cut through the darkness, calm and final. "You should have heeded the warning. Those who visit me never leave." The shadows enveloped Lucy, their cold embrace suffocating. Her screams were swallowed by the darkness as the figure's grin widened. When morning came, the storm had passed, and the sun cast a pale light over Eldridge. The townsfolk noticed that Henry's house was eerily silent, the windows dark and still. They sent for someone to check on the old man, but when they entered, they found only the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the room. There was no sign of Henry or Lucy, just an overwhelming silence, and the sense that something unspeakable had taken place. The house on the hill remained abandoned, a somber monument to the old man who had never let anyone leave. And when the fog rolled in, the shadows seemed to move, hinting at the dark, eternal company that awaited anyone who dared to enter. The end. Next up, The Man Who Lives on the Hill Volume 2. Years had passed since Lucy Caldwell had disappeared from Henry Kroll's house. The story of her vanishing had faded into local legend, a cautionary tale for children, about the dangers of curiosity and the unknown. Eldridge had moved on, but whispers about the house on the hill had, like the ever-present mist. One crisp autumn afternoon, a young historian named Clara Matthews arrived in Eldridge, drawn by the stories of Henry Kroll and the mystery of his disappearance. She was a scholar of the macabre, fascinated by the intersection of folklore and reality, Her curiosity had led her to seek out the truth behind the legends, and she was determined to uncover it, even if it meant confronting the dark history of the old house. Clara drove up the winding path to the house, its silhouette stark against the fading sunlight. The once foreboding structure now looked more like a relic, shrouded in layers of dust and neglect. Her heart raced with a mix of excitement and trepidation as she approached the creaking front door. She knocked, but the door swung open with an eerie groan, as if inviting her in. Clara stepped inside, her flashlight piercing the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, and her footsteps echoed in the empty silence. The interior was, as she had expected, cluttered with old books, strange artifacts, and faded photographs. The fire in the hearth had long since gone cold, and the shadows seemed to cling to the walls with an almost palpable energy. Clara began her investigation, methodically examining the room. As she flipped through a dusty ledger on a rickety table, she noticed that the entries were filled with cryptic notations and drawings of twisted, shadowy figures. It was clear that Henry had been obsessed with something far darker than mere folklore. A shiver ran down Clara's spine as she came across a journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Its cover was cracked and weathered, and the pages were filled with frantic scrawls about companions and the darkness that never leaves. The more she read, the more she understood that Henry had been consumed by a malevolent force, something that transcended mere superstition. Her flashlight flickered as she turned to leave, casting erratic beams that danced across the walls. The shadows seemed to grow, elongating and writhing as if disturbed by her presence. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, but her determination pushed her forward. She reached the hallway, but something stopped her, a soft whispering that seemed to come from all directions. The whispers grew louder, forming incoherent murmurs that were both enticing and terrifying. Clara followed the sound, driven by a mixture of fear and fascination. The whispers led her to a door she hadn't noticed before. It was partially hidden behind a tattered curtain and seemed to be almost seamlessly blended with the wall. With a deep breath, Clara opened it, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air grew colder as she descended. At the bottom, she found herself in a dimly lit chamber, its walls lined with mirrors. The mirrors were clouded and cracked, but Clara could still make out distorted reflections of herself. The room felt alive, the shadows in the mirrors moving independently of their surroundings. In the center of the room stood an old wooden chair, worn and ancient. Clara approached it, her flashlight revealing a chilling sight. Etched into the backrest were names, including Lucy Caldwell's. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the names were not merely carved. They seemed to be written in a script that pulsed with a dark, almost liquid substance. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of voices, each one layered over the other. Clara could feel the temperature plummet, her breath visible in the freezing air. The mirrors began to darken, and the shadows took on a more tangible form, reaching out toward her. A cold, disembodied voice echoed through the chamber. "You have come to join the others." Panic surged through Clara. She turned to flee, but the door had vanished, replaced by a solid wall of shadows. The mirrors warped and twisted, reflecting nightmarish figures that closed in around her. As the darkness enveloped her, Clara's flashlight flickered out. She could hear the voices now, not just whispers, but full, resonant tones of the lost souls who had come before her. Their words mingled with the shadows, and she felt an icy grip tighten around her. With a final, desperate scream, Clara was pulled into the darkness, her form melding with the shadows. The chamber fell silent once more, the only sound the faintest echo of her scream, orating through the room. Back in Eldridge, the house remained as it always had, a grim monument to its dark past. The locals spoke of Clara Matthews in hushed, fearful tones. Her disappearance became another layer to the legend, a grim reminder of the fate that awaited those who ventured too close to the heart of darkness. The house on the hill stood silent and brooding, its shadows alive and ever hungry, waiting for the next curious soul to step across its threshold. The end. Lastly, The Man Who Lives on the Hill Volume 3. The town of Eldridge was accustomed to whispers and strange occurrences, but the disappearance of Clara Matthews had shaken it to its core. The once bustling streets grew quieter, and the fog that rolled in seemed heavier, more oppressive. The house on the hill stood as a somber landmark, its reputation growing darker with each passing day. Despite the growing fear, a new face arrived in town. Michael Harper, a paranormal investigator known for his tenacity and skeptical approach, had caught wind of the mysterious disappearances linked to the old Krull house. Intrigued by the challenge, he decided to uncover the truth behind the haunting, though he approached it with scientific curiosity rather than superstition. Michael's arrival did not go unnoticed. The townsfolk, wary and apprehensive, shared what little they knew about the house and its cursed history. They spoke of Henry Krull and the chilling rumors surrounding his supposed companions. Michael listened intently, his eyes reflecting a mix of doubt and determination. One overcast evening, Michael approached the house. Its dilapidated facade seemed almost to groan under the weight of its own history. He entered with a mix of skepticism and resolve, armed with high-tech equipment designed to detect electromagnetic fields, temperature fluctuations, and other signs of paranormal activity. Inside, the house was as he had expected, dark, cluttered, and steeped in a palpable sense of dread. He set up his equipment in the main room and began his investigation. The ambient temperature dropped noticeably, a curious anomaly, he noted. Shadows seemed to flicker and shift, though Michael attributed this to the poor lighting and the movement of the house itself. As night fell, Michael ventured into the depths of the house, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The further he explored, the more he felt an unsettling presence, an almost tangible force that seemed to watch him. His instruments recorded strange fluctuations, but he remained determined to find logical explanations. He descended the hidden staircase Clara Matthews had discovered, his flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. The mirror-filled chamber appeared, just as she had described. The broken, reflective surfaces seemed to writhe with unseen energy. Michael began setting up cameras and motion sensors, analyzing the mirrors and the eerie carvings on the chair. His scientific mind saw patterns, trying to decode the phenomena through empirical evidence. The air grew colder, and a sense of unease washed over him, but he pressed on. Suddenly, the mirrors seemed to darken, their surfaces swirling as if alive. Shadows began to coalesce, forming indistinct shapes that seemed to pulse with a malevolent intent. Michael's instruments went haywire, and the temperature plunged drastically. He could hear the faint whispers that Clara had mentioned, their words indecipherable but laden with a dark urgency. Michael's breath became visible in the freezing air. The shadows grew denser, and the figures began to solidify. The distorted reflections in the mirrors took on recognizable forms, faces twisted in anguish, eyes hollow and pleading. He realized that these were the souls of those who had vanished, trapped within the house's grasp. Desperation set in. Michael tried to record everything, his hands shaking as he operated his equipment. The whispers grew louder, forming a chorus of sorrowful voices. The shadows advanced, their cold touch seeping through his clothes, freezing his skin. Just as Michael felt the encroaching darkness tighten around him, he stumbled upon a notebook, wedged beneath the mirror. The pages were filled with frantic scribbles, notes from Henry Krull, detailing a dark ritual to bind the souls of the lost to the house. The ritual was meant to feed the shadows, ensuring their eternal torment and the house's malevolence. Understanding dawned on Michael. The house was not just haunted. It was a prison, its walls infused with a dark energy that fed on the souls it ensnared. He realized that escaping would require more than just physical effort. It required breaking the cycle of darkness that bound the spirits. With renewed determination, Michael began to dismantle the mirrors, hoping to disrupt the dark energy that flowed through them. As he smashed the reflective surfaces, the whispers turned into wails of anger and desperation. The shadows recoiled, their forms shifting wildly. The room was engulfed in a chaotic swirl of darkness. Michael fought against the cold, feeling as though the very essence of the house was fighting back. He continued his work, breaking mirrors and chanting the protective words he had learned from ancient texts. Finally, with a thunderous crack, the last mirror shattered. The shadows writhed and screamed, then began to dissipate, their forms collapsing into a formless, dissipating mist. The temperature began to rise, and the oppressive weight of the darkness lifted. Exhausted and shaken, Michael emerged from the house as dawn broke. The once somber house seemed lighter, its malevolent aura dissipated. The shadows that had plagued it were gone, but Michael knew the battle was far from over. The house had been freed from the dark ritual, but the scars remained. Michael left Eldridge with the knowledge that the darkness had been driven away, but he also understood that some mysteries were best left undisturbed. The house on the hill would stand as a grim reminder of the shadows that lurked within, a tale of caution for those who might one day seek to uncover its secrets. The end.